the Netball Super League in the UK. It's been around for close to 2 decades, and the team that I work with, London Pulse, had an unbelievable year. They topped the league table at the end of the year, which then put us into the playoffs. And then we won our semi-final and then into the final, which we won. That was incredible. And yeah, the analytics definitely plays a huge part of what we were doing. We utilized some GPS data this year, which was great. Sort of built out some visualizations that helped us really understand the physicality of the sport, helped like injury prevention type pieces. And it really informed some of our conversations on a weekly basis about how do we modify training to make sure that players remain fit and healthy for the next round. We had a really strong multidisciplinary team. So, we've got physios, nutritionists, strength and conditioning coaches. We've got our head coach, our assistant coaches, and myself talking about these different things. And the analytics does play a part of that conversation. We're able to say, some players are reporting some tiredness or fatigue, or like that session was particularly hard, or doing this thing before a match day like is or isn't working. And we could go and look at some of our data, whether that's match analysis data or our GPS information or other stuff, to bring some objectivity to that and confirm what people are seeing and saying. And that was really powerful for us. It helped the S&Cs modify their training plans as appropriate. It helped the coaches change the intensity or volume of training.
So hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Secrets of the Viz. Today I have Zak with me, who is here to talk a little bit on a Viz that he did for a Chelsea FC Vizathon. So over to you, Zak, to give a little intro about yourself.
Hi, my name is Zak Saucede. I'm a data consultant at the Information Lab. I've worked with Till for about 2.5 years now, but spent about 8 years working in high performance sport prior to that, across a number of different sports, but predominantly tennis, in a role as a performance analyst, so using video and data to help athletes and coaches. My career has kind of merged more towards data-focused roles, less of the video, but still have a little bit of involvement in sport as well in my personal time, which is great. But yeah, a really fun journey through sport and broader data analytics.
That's cool. I think my first impression when I think about sports analytics is the movie Moneyball. That was my introduction to how analytics is being used in sports, and it's a very interesting film. So if anyone haven't watched that film, I strongly recommend. Basically, it's a movie about this coach who uses player statistics to predict who are the players that he want to keep or change within his team lineup. It's very data focused. It's a little geeky for people like us, but it's one of the best films that I watch. So let's talk a little bit about the Viz that you did. I know this is done as a submission to Chelsea's Performance Insights Vizathon. Can you give us a little bit of intro about what this whole competition is about?
Yeah, absolutely. So there was a competition that was created earlier in the year that was designed to find inspirational ways of changing behavior through data analytics. And they wanted people to submit everything from different softwares, or it could even just be a sketch as an idea. But the goal was really to help inform players about the analytics that are being generated in the club and help them improve their performances on the pitch, as well as the work that they're doing off of the pitch, whether that's kind of well-being, strength and conditioning, different areas that can support the player in a better way and encourage better conversations between players and support staff as well. They released a couple of different data sets that could be used for the competition, but you didn't have to use them. You could bring other supplementary information in, but it was a completely open book. And if you go onto the GitHub webpage, you can see every single submission that was entered up until the deadlines earlier in the year.
I think this is one of the few attempts by external agency of company, apart from Tableau and any of the big companies, that actually focus on bringing the community together through a little competition like that. And it's really nice that they have some prizes involved as well. It's a great way to inspire and uplift creativity within the community.
Yeah, it's pretty novel, to be fair, particularly in performance sport, where people are very conscious about a competitive edge, don't want to give too much away of what they're doing.
For your submission, you basically did kind of like a mobile app to focus on recovery. How did that idea come about?
Yeah, so there was a few things that came to mind when trying to plan this project. I guess through my experience in sport to date, I've done a lot of the work that's been around like tactical analysis. So in tennis, it's about winning and losing points. In football, it's about formations and playing styles. The work I do in netball was very similar as well, around match analysis. So that was the first thing that really drew me in. The work that I've done has predominantly been building reporting for consumption on a laptop. And so I wanted to challenge myself in a different way. I guess that's why I went down this mobile route, was also thinking about this concept of trying to change behaviors for the players. If I think about the environment that they're going to be playing a match or at their training ground, and in that moment, they're not going to be looking at their GPS data necessarily. Once they come off pitch, then they're going to start to engage in their recovery, whether that's eating, drinking, or some kind of supplementary method. And to me, that seemed like a really important point in which they're probably going to be picking up their phone or putting their watch back on or with a device in some way. And I thought that this would be a great way for someone to engage in the data of the match that they've just played in or the training session that they've been working in just previously, like important high level information that tells them, right, okay, you've done this in this match, you need this amount of recovery, or you need this type of thing, or like your training is at optimal level, or you're maybe at a risk of something. And it would then drive the behavior of what they do next. So if they know that they need to go and see a physio about something, they would do that. If they need to consume a certain amount of protein or fluids, they can go and do that. So these were the things that I was trying to think about in terms of why do sort of like a mobile analytics concept, I guess. Naturally, I also track a lot of things myself. I use an Apple Watch now for about 10 years. And so I have a lot of information on my own personal health, and therefore I've engaged in different apps. And some of these apps are really good in terms of the visualizations that they produce and the insights that they give. I wanted to take inspiration from that and apply that to this performance environment. So if you go onto my visualization, there is this little light bulb that you can click onto, and I have a number of these different applications as examples of what I really enjoyed. This first one here is something that I use on a regular basis called Peak Watch app. And this has a number of different elements that are focused on performance, like training fatigue. So this is something like an acute chronic workload ratio calculation. It determines the difference between your most recent physical efforts against the last 7 days against something over the last month. And if you've done an excessive amount of physical effort in that most recent period, then you could be at risk of injury. This is a company that is targeted at professional athletes of different sports, and they're trying to bring all of that into one place. What I really like about these visualizations on the watch is that you have very little real estate to work with. And so you can't do some of these sort of best practices that we typically like to do with bigger reports that go on a dashboard, but they're having to try and find a way of presenting information that is very clear to understand with almost no context around it. I thought that was a really interesting challenge to try and bring to life. And then slightly beyond these dedicated apps, sort of go into the Chelsea app itself and seeing what are the colors that get used, what's the format. So you can see here that we've got this kind of toolbar along the bottom, so you can click along to different bits. We can see the main colors that are being used, the graphics, sort of brand colors from the badge as well. So that's where some of my design stuff came from in particular.
That's really interesting. Were there any challenges in building this visualization or data points that you thought might be interesting but couldn't find the source for it?
Yeah, from the data perspective, I wanted to use what was provided. I wanted to really focus on the design aspects and not get too bogged down with the data. I was quite happy to kind of take what was made available. And from that perspective, it was relatively simple. In terms of the challenges, my goal was to try and do something with Power BI simply because they have a native app on the Apple Watch, which was what I was really trying to achieve initially. I discovered it was quite tricky to figure out what type of charts were accessible or not. So I sort of pivoted quite quickly to Tableau, certainly more comfortable with Tableau. And I knew that I would be able to be a little bit more creative around this. The only sort of technical challenge I had was figuring out mobile functionality. I wanted the phone views to be functional. And that was really interesting to figure out the nuances of building something for a dashboard versus for the mobile layout. There's not an awful lot of interaction, but I didn't mind about that too much because, I mean, it's all still conceptual, right? So I felt like it was a good halfway house between something that was functional, you could click around, but didn't have to go that full extent of mobile working app.
Do you see an uptake when it comes to dashboard in your organization or companies out there that are embracing this mobile first design?
In my own experience, I work with a professional netball team and managed to get them on board with Tableau over the last year. And something that made me chuckle was that despite all of the good things that I had built and all of the planning that I'd done and been taught to do in the past, it was probably about maybe 6 weeks into having these established reports available to different support staff, and in particular our head coach, that I actually realized that our head coach was consuming all of our desktop dashboards on her phone. You know, when you get that sort of crushing feeling that you upload something to Tableau Public or a cloud or whatever, and you forget to sort of delete the mobile layout. And so I realized that it was all being condensed into this mobile view. That was like a bit of a lesson learned there, but that was an interesting example actually, because it was around the time in which this visualization competition was sort of taking place. So I kind of had this push of having to suddenly think about, okay, this person's actually consuming this information on a phone. What is the best way that this works for them? It does make you think very different about how something is presented and what's possible to be presented. How much scrolling do you want to do up and down an app? What's the size of the information? Do you need like a really big number because it's on a smaller device? Or can you get away with smaller details? And so trying to find that balance between something that was big and showy and obvious versus somewhat discreet is quite an interesting challenge to try and think about, that I don't think we have to consider as detailed as when we're building desktop reports.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably an appetite in your organization to go more mobile design. So I'm sure you're probably going to explore that more in the future.
Yeah, sure.
So looking at your Tableau Public profile, I realized you also have a lot of sports related vizzes. You have something that you're currently working on?
Yeah, I mean, with my Tableau Public in general, the sports elements are something that I gravitate towards very naturally. I also feel quite strongly about sharing good design and ideas around sports visualizations, because I think it's something that is maybe not as considered in sport. I think we're quite comfortable being a bit more like rough and ready and just get the numbers out. Like sport environments typically are very demanding in that if you think of 1 week in any professional sport, you've got like multiple training sessions, you've got your match or maybe a couple of matches in a single week, and you're constantly bouncing from one thing to the next. And so normally you're trying to get this information out as quick as you can, and it doesn't matter if it hasn't got 20x padding or the colors don't quite match, or those things are sometimes slightly less cared for. But something that I feel quite passionate about, weirdly, is trying to share that actually we can make some of these visualizations really pretty, as well as being functional and delivering what they need to about stakeholders. So yeah, I'm hoping to try and encourage that. I think this squad depth chart is quite a nice example of it, but I'm someone that likes to take a look around. Like LinkedIn is quite a good place for inspiration sometimes, but I found this post by Dave Williams a number of months ago where he was looking at the social media images that different Premier League teams are putting out. And if you know your Premier League teams, you can see like a badge in most of them, but just by seeing the colours, you get a really good sense of who that club actually is. But I really like the variety of what people are doing. And I thought that would be quite a nice thing to take inspiration from. That's where I came up with this sort of squad depth chart visualization. The text on the left is just made up text. It doesn't actually mean anything. But the idea of this report was that it would give a report based on a team that kind of is assessing players on a grade level, And on the right-hand side, you see where that player is and their grading, sort of on a pitch format. What I wanted to do here was, if you click onto the filter, I wanted to be able to switch the background and the look and feel, which would align with the blocky sort of colours versus the graphic colours. I wanted to play around with this, so you could sort of look at your Sky Blues graphic and then look at the block colours, and it would change the colours depending on what you're trying to achieve. It was almost like another sort of design challenge for me personally, bring something relatively simple to life that was just a bit more than standard text.
This is really interesting.
Yeah.
Latching on a previous point, you talk about sports analytics being that it needs to be fast for you to grasp insights. I also know from your recent post that you guys won the Netball Super League. Congratulations again. And I know it's a competition that requires you to be able to act on insights really fast. Are you able to share a little bit on how data and analytics is being integrated within this whole process of managing a team and going for competition and stuff like that?
Yeah, sure. The Netball Super League in the UK, it's been around for close to 2 decades. And the team that I work with, London Pulse, had an unbelievable year. They topped the league table at the end of the year, which then put us into the playoffs. And then we won our semi-final and then into the final, which we won. That was incredible. And yeah, the analytics definitely plays a huge part of what we were doing. We utilized some GPS data this year, which was great. Sort of built out some visualizations that helped us really understand the physicality of the sport, helped like injury prevention type pieces. And it really informed some of our conversations on a weekly basis about how do we modify training to make sure that players remain fit and healthy for the next round. We had a really strong multidisciplinary team. So, we've got physios, nutritionists, strength and conditioning coaches. We've got our head coach, our assistant coaches, and myself talking about these different things. And the analytics does play a part of that conversation. We're able to say, some players are reporting some tiredness or fatigue, or like that session was particularly hard, or doing this thing before a match day like is or isn't working. And we could go and look at some of our data, whether that's match analysis data or our GPS information or other stuff, to bring some objectivity to that and confirm what people are seeing and saying. And that was really powerful for us to help the S&Cs modify their training plans as appropriate, to help the coaches change the intensity or volume of training.
And I never knew that sports analytics is that deep. You had so many things like coding the video, putting bookmarks and the data points so that you guys can analyze the different events that happen in the match. I think that is really interesting. Thank you so much, Zak, for spending time with us today to talk through your bliss, as well as give us a little primer on how analytics is being used in sports and ethics, performance management, injury prevention. I think there's a lot of ways that analytics is being used. And it's amazing because all of this help us to make more informed decisions so that we can manage the team better. This has been so insightful for me as well. I hope everyone learned something from this, and we'll see everyone in the next episode. Thank you.
Thank you so much.